back and welcome to a video where I talk about probably the worst books that I read in 2023. Some of them I actually stopped reading, but most of them I finished. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I just did not like in 2023. Thankfully in January I started very strong because I don't have anything for January, but I do have just one for February, and that would be The Black Hawks, which is a high fantasy, fast moving heist novel where our protagonist accidentally gets caught up with this crew intermingled with royalty and they go on a quest in the wilderness. And I thought because he was a rogue character, he kind of walks the moral line of good and bad. And I do love a character with a morally grey backstory, but a heart of gold. So they're trying to do their best, but they keep getting caught up in bad situations. But I got 80% into this book and I realized that I was just slogging through it and I was not enjoying the characterization. I didn't like the way the main character felt like everything was happening to him rather than being active and going, I'm going to do this thing. There was one, maybe two side characters I was interested in, and that was a very vague interest. And I could see myself just giving this a 3 stars, maybe even a 2, depending on the ending. And I can't believe I read 80% of this book before I decided to put it down. So I think lesson learned. If I don't like a book that feels like a slog, put it down sooner, because this put me in a bit of a setback, a bit of a reading slump, and I could have avoided it if I just returned the library audiobook. Then in March, I have 2 books that hit my worst books. One of them is You Should See Me in a Crown, and this is young adult, so not a category I really reach for a lot, but because this centered a girl who is trying to be academically focused and go for this prom queen title so that she can win a scholarship to her revered university, I thought this would be really motivating and have supportive friends. There was also a female-female sapphic romance that was teased in here too, and I thought this would be lovely and supportive with found family in it. And I want to say I got 20% into this, but I honestly cannot remember because for the life of me I just could not stand her friends. She was just a bit of an airhead as well. Maybe that was intentional because she's going to be set up as like fleeting in terms of her life priorities rather than her academic ones, but it was just too much for me. I did not like the way that it was being written, so I thought I'm going to cut my losses and put it down. This is not a young adult book that I end up enjoying. Then I tried the audiobook Zone 1, which is a post-apocalyptic story about this military guy trying to survive but is also connected to potentially this like encampment, or I want to say organization, but that's used very loosely. And he's going into buildings with others to confirm that they are clear of zombies, but he's also going back to places that he was in during the outbreak, and he's having a lot of PTSD reactions and memories spliced over what he's currently experiencing. I just found the writer's delivery really dry, and I was not interested in this character at all. It could have been so much more immersive, but I just didn't care for it. There was some great zombie action at the very beginning that was supposed to like hook you into the story, and I'm like, I've seen all this before. I don't really care. It's not sharing it in a way that makes me feel motivated or worried about the characters, and I knew that when that happened I didn't care about the book, so I put it down. Then I had one disappointing one in April, and that was Even Though I Knew the End. Now I ended up rating this about a 3 stars. In retrospect, I'd probably do it 2.5 to 3, just because when I think about my reading experience, it makes me feel tired. So it wasn't super motivating, honestly. From memory, it is about a woman who is an investigator and she's caught up in this magical underworld. So it's kind of fantasy, sci-fi, and investigation with a sapphic romance. And I get that it was a novella, so it had a short amount of time to set up, write, and then conclude its story, but it just didn't do it in a way that was particularly satisfying. It was very much like it was ticking things off a list in terms of, yep, I nailed that part of the plot, yep, it connects to this one, and this one is how it ends. So I felt like I could have just skipped it and I wouldn't feel any differently. But then, now this is when I become salty, because this is an author that I really like, and I thought this was going to be a release that I was obsessed with, a new series by him that I would love. And that author is Sebastian de Castell, and the book is The Malevolent Seven. Now, I loved The Greatcoats by him, and I loved the Spellslinger series, which is a young adult series by him. Fantastic characters, fantastic world, fantastic stakes. This one, not so much. What I struggled with most in this one was the tone of voice and the way that it was setting up all of the dynamics of the plot and the characters. It did not feel like it was woven together very well when I'm comparing it to The Greatcoats or Spellslinger. And those are books obviously he's written previously to this one. So I thought his writing would have been more developed in this book than it was in those. And it feels like with this one he regressed, which upsets me, to be honest. He did a decent job of setting up demons and the magic system in here, but in terms of the characters and their personal purposes, I could not tell you their names anymore. I don't even remember particularly what their backgrounds are or what type of character they were, because he sets up this group very, very quickly. So it's like Sebastian de Castell looked at the Greatcoats and how idealized and honorable they were, and then he thought, I'm going to flip the formula and do something where these characters are more morally corrupt and undesirable. It was just not nailing it, and I did a spoiler-free review on my channel, and in that review I had very freshly read it, so I probably gave it, I think, 3.5 to 4 stars. Now looking back on it, I'd probably give it a 3. 2.5 to 3. I just feel very underwhelmed by it. Then I read a new release by Rick Riordan, who wrote the Percy Jackson books, called The Sun and the Star, which is a Nico D'Angelo story. Nico D'Angelo is one of the demigods in Rick Riordan's world, and a demigod means that they are the offspring of one of the Olympian Greek gods and a human. So they often have abilities that go along with that god. And true enough, there is 2 characters that go on a quest in this book, in Nico's book. While I like them as characters and I enjoyed the beginning, and I also enjoyed that it riffed a bit on themes that Rick Riordan had set up before. So these kids often go through very traumatic situations, but no one really addresses that. And so these kids are now older and they're in like 17, 18, early teens, and they're reflecting back on what they have done versus what they're doing now, and just talking about mental health and PTSD and stuff while they're going on this quest as well. So there were elements about this that I liked, but ultimately it just felt like this was dragging on super long, and it could have been wrapped up in probably 2-ish thirds of the book, but it dragged on for much longer than it should have, and it really lost the intensity of the plot, and it felt a little bit repetitive at some points as well. So while I only gave it a 3 stars for Rick Riordan, that's quite a low rating for me, whereas other books I would be like, oh, it's a 3 stars, I'd recommend it if you want to read it, and like, sure, if you want to read this one, go for it, but it's nothing like the other Percy Jackson books. Percy Jackson, Magnus Chase, the Olympians books as well, all of them I much prefer over this book. So I was quite disappointed with this Rick Riordan release, and while I'm glad I read it, I also would not reread it, and I've reread Rick Riordan's other stuff quite a lot, so to say that as well means that I'm not jazzed about it. And then you might have seen me talk about Parable of the Sower in my best books of 2023. However, I read its sequel, it's a duology, so there's only 2 of them. I read its sequel, Parable of the Talents, and I wish I could unread it because it just did not hit as well or even remotely close to Parable of the Sower. So Parable of the Talents still follows Lauren as the protagonist, but it's set obviously after, like years after this has happened. And so because it's set such a long point after the first book, a lot has developed since, kind of in the peripherals, and that means that there are additional characters and additional traumas to process, and also dire situations that crop up again just when some characters think they are safe. It's a very rich but dark world. I want to give so much away about Talents, but I really just can't. What I can say though is that parts of the end that were discussed with Lauren's character, it felt like a disparity in some points to who she'd been built up with throughout the story. And it also was just unsatisfying because you got her tangent in someone else, and this someone else was just all over the place. And anyway, the story just felt like it was dragging on and didn't really have a point. And again, like when I read The Black Hawks, why did I read all of it? Why did I read all this book? Why did I finish it? Clearly I did not like it, and I'm angry that it's the sequel to this book when that was one of my favorite books of 2023. So I am going forward and pretending that this is just a standalone, because honestly it wraps up basically as a standalone anyway, because the second book takes off so far, like 20 to 30 years after this book does. It doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. Parable of the Talents, it is so bad to me that I've decided it doesn't exist. And then I must have been on a roll with post-apocalyptic books. If you have any really good ones, please recommend them to me, because clearly I went through Struggle City in 2023, but I also read The Power. Again, I gave this 2 stars. Why did I continue reading it? I think part of me was just suspending my disbelief and suspending my hope because I wanted it to be better and it just didn't turn out that way. So this is almost like a literary fiction post-apocalyptic story where all over the world women are developing abilities and men aren't. So women are coming into power and obviously abusing it, and society shifts to accommodate all of that. And while it discussed very interesting things in a pandemic focus where society's understanding of something shifts drastically, I think it captured different movements and the psychology of people very well, given that we've all been through the COVID pandemic, and we can kind of see how public perception and psyche shifts when something on a global scale happens. I think this book was really clever because it captured a lot of that, but in terms of the characters and their purpose, it felt like one character was being built up this whole time, and it's like the author didn't know where to take her. And I'm like, why bother building all this up when you're just not gonna continue? Like, you just left it and it wasn't actually really a thing. It was just so disappointing because it felt like it was potentially going somewhere and then it was just not that great. So again, why did I read it? And then the last 2 I have separate video reviews for if you would like to check them out. I will link them in the description. One of them is The Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England, which is by Brandon Sanderson. It is his 2nd Kickstarter release, and this is supposed to be about a wizard who wakes up in like a country and western world, and he's like, how did I get here? Why do I have a handbook? Why is my handbook blown up? And why do I only have 1 or 2 pages left? And who is trying to kill me because I know I'm not safe here? So he has to team up with the locals in order to go on a quest with them. And it's just a coward to hero story. And I hate coward to hero stories. I like my characters to have a little bit of a redeemable quality and also be kind of like a heart of gold character with potential morally grey things. And this character just cracked so many jokes and it was very similar the whole way through. So the joke got very tired and I was like, this guy is an idiot. I don't want to read this anymore. And again, I finished it because I know Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors and I know that a lot of people would probably ask what my opinion is on this book. And you know, now I've done it. I've got a review, I've got an opinion, I finished the book and then I sold it. I don't even own it anymore. And that's pretty much the same with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And I also gave both of these 2 stars. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is about 2 characters from 2 separate worlds, and for some reason they wake up one morning in each other's bodies. One of them is like a ghost outside of her body, and the guy who wakes up as her visually looks like her. So no one knows that they've done essentially a swap, but obviously they know, and they've got to figure out why they've done this swap and the customs of each of their worlds in order to get by and convince everyone else that everything is fine and normal. At the same time, Yumi is one of the protagonists and Painter or Nikaro is the other protagonist. And in Nikaro's world, there are nightmares that infiltrate the city. And if you are a painter, you capture the image in ink of what the nightmare should be, and he paints them often as bamboo, and they change into bamboo, so they take on the form that you paint them as. So it had some great potential and world building, but the characters were just so boring to me, and I just did not care. Also, Brandon Sanderson, bless him, he tries to write romance, but this is just not good romance. And this book was supposed to be like a romance book, and I'm like, these guys are buddies or allies or friends. I just didn't get that buzz of romance from them or that spark. I'm just disappointed in Brandon's Kickstarters in general, and you can see on my cart here I've got The Sunlit Man, which is his 4th and final Kickstarter book, which makes me very nervous, and I haven't even opened it. I've left it in the plastic because I'm like, what if I want to sell this one too? Maybe that will be on my worst books of 2024 video, who knows? But that is all of the books that I deem my worst books of 2023. Let me know what you didn't like in the comments. I would love to know, but thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat with you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.